Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Day two. Day two of Next Steps, DevCon. Super excited for everyone to be here. Real quick, just make sure you guys can hear us, see us. Just give us a quick hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know where you're from. Where you watching us from. And then while everyone is doing that, I'm really excited, for this day. Guys, we this conference and stuff got put together within pretty much like a week and a half, 2 weeks, and just kind of like thought of everything and just quickly pieced it together. And within that time frame, guys, we are officially sold out. I wanted to open it up for everybody. And then we put a cap on it at 500 people, and we're officially sold out. There are no more tickets currently. We will figure out a way how to get people and stuff involved who wasn't able to attend or register. But with that being said, we have a closed box right now with some awesome people in it. And so right now in the chat, I see Denver, I see Cleveland. I see Oregon. I see Arkansas. Come on, I need some more. I see VA. So who else would we have in the building? And while we're doing that too, Ryan, where you originally from?
I'm originally from Canada, so I actually grew up in the province of Manitoba in a small city there. It's kind of like your Midwest of Canada, is the way I always like to put it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, we got Montana, Indonesia. Wow.
Nice.
Welcome. LA in the building. Appreciate you being from LA. So guys, we have a friend here, Mr. Ryan Burgess. Ryan is a software engineer manager at Netflix, which I would imagine right now is probably getting a overload of of viewers right now. And so we're going to dive in, to some of that. We're going to dive into like Ryan's journey, and just like his ultimate goal and stuff of, how do you get to Netflix? And that's what day two is about. Day two is about, some people and stuff who's reached, certain levels in their careers, and we want to kind of like get an understanding of how to reach that their points and stuff in their careers, and so we can duplicate some of that, so we can reach some of our goals and stuff too as well. So want everybody to welcome Ryan, give him a hello in the chat, welcome in. And yeah, man. So Ryan, you said Canada?
Yeah, the cold north, man. So yeah, I grew up there. Spent most of my life there. It was not until I think it's actually just going on 7 years that I've lived in the US and only lived in the Bay Area. So 7 years ago, 2013, moved out to San Francisco. So that's where I've been since then, since Canada.
How cold is it getting in Canada?
And it depends where you are, but it gets cold. Like, I mean, where I grew up, it was near Winnipeg. And like, if anyone knows what Winnipeg is like, it is cold. Like it gets to like -40, which in Canada, we go by Celsius. So -40 is really funny, is the same in Celsius as it is in Fahrenheit. So anyone in the US used to Fahrenheit, guess what? It is cold. Like, I don't want to experience that anymore. I dealt with it enough. I like the nice California weather. San Francisco is great because it's kind of the best of both worlds. So it's not too cold, not too hot.
I don't even want to imagine what -40 looks like, feels like. I mean, you can't even cry outside at -40.
No, man, your tears will freeze. Like, you are putting layers and layers of clothes on. You got to plug your car in to make sure that it can even start. There was countless times that the car doesn't start because it's too cold. Yeah, I don't even know why my parents like chose to be living there. It doesn't make any sense.
Car pass. Okay, so were you in high school when you in Canada, or did you go to high school and stuff out of the Bay, or?
No. So I've high school, everything, lived in Canada the whole time. Like I said earlier, it wasn't until 7 years ago that I moved to the Bay Area. So just moved to work in out here.
Okay, awesome. Going in college, is you focus, or actually, when's your first interest start to come in as far as into programming?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting question because thinking back to it, it was like, how did I get to this point, and what were things that pushed me to want to go into programming? And I think back to it, it really wasn't something that I was interested in. Like some people start to learn in high school. I mean, I did a little bit of like HTML messing around. I'm going to date myself a little bit. Like there was no MySpace and things like that. It was more GeoCities and Angel Fire, those nice, beautiful animated firing GIFs and things like that. I grew up, I would say, what really probably made me interested in it was skateboarding. I think skateboarding to me was really what changed a lot of my perspective on things in life. It's really funny. I don't know what made me think of that. But it was definitely, it was before high school that I started skateboarding. I was something that, like, to be funny enough, was like my dad was like super against for some reason, didn't want me skateboarding. And so I remember having to like scrounge up some money and going and purchasing my first skateboard, it was great to have that. But the reason that I say that it kind of kicked off my career is it started to expose me to things that, like, in artwork, that I really gravitated towards. So I loved the skateboarding graphics, always was drawing, and that kind of like helped me realize that, this is something I love. I got into graffiti and tattooing, and I never actually tattooed, but that was something that I loved, tattoos. And this all kind of stemmed from skateboarding. And I started to realize, like, I do want to do something later in life that I get paid for doing some form of artwork. And so I started to apply after high school to a couple colleges that really focusing on graphic design, and more specifically web design. That was something that I was like, oh, okay, like this new web thing is, happening. This seems really cool. And, I played around with different things, like I mentioned, Angel Fire and GeoCities, and knew that it was something that would be really interesting. During that time, I'd also been offered a tattoo apprenticeship. I had a friend who owned a tattoo shop, and had seen all my artwork over the years and was like, you should really be doing this. And, luckily didn't fully convince me. I mean, I love tattoos and I think it'd be a fun career. But I'm so happy that I got accepted in one college, went there. It was a program it was a 2-year program, really focused on, it was a mix of like design and development. It was an interesting newer course that they had put together. But I quickly found, like, I thought I wanted to be doing more design work, which, I mean, I still like that a little bit, but I quickly discovered programming and just like how cool it was to actually do development work. And after that, I was like, no, I'm going deeper into the programming side. So I don't have a typical like CS background or anything degree on that. A lot of it was, introduced to me in this web course. And then a lot of it just was me having to do a lot more learning on my own time and digging in and just like really pushing me then. Those were the days too of still like the DHTML, table layouts, and Flash was a big thing. I did a ton of Flash. Like I think a little bit of AS1, which is like ActionScript 1, but most of it was like ActionScript 2. And then it wasn't really until like ActionScript 3 that it started to become feeling like an actual programming language. But we all know Flash didn't last that long. So it was, moving more into the JavaScript front end days of that. So that was, really, really early in my career, in school and starting out there.
So I think I've seen one of your quotes, your love for design, that you will code for tattoos.
Yeah. And it's true. It's happened. I definitely have traded work over the years. I think a few tattoos I've had This was very early in my career too, as I built like the tattoo website for a shop and did some things like that for them. So just, you know, it's a great way to trade because it's cheaper for them and it's cheaper for me. It's like this, it's a nice mutual trade.
Yeah. How many tattoos do you have, real quick?
I don't know. It's a very good, it's a very good question.
When did you stop counting?
It's been a while too, because like, I think of it when, you know, I'm not just when I go lately to get tattooed, it's not just like you get a tattoo and you're done. Sometimes like I will have like one piece that's, you know, 3-4 hours and it's done. But a lot of my tattoos have been these very large pieces that you're going and spending. My last tattoo is roughly 70 hours. So it becomes like, is it a tattoo or is it multiple tattoos? I don't really know. They're all kind of bleeding in together now. Yeah, I would say definitely more than, like, I would say my body is 80% covered maybe, or roughly about that in tattoos. So
wait, so 70 hours, your last one. How many sessions is that?
It's a good question. There were probably, most of them are around like 5 hours, 5 hours at a time.
So well over 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So having your love for tattoos, and that, I mean, that's a very interesting start to get into web development. You know, what was your first job like? You know, as you make this transition, what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So part of the first job, interestingly enough, it was part of my school in a sense that as part of this 2-year program, 2 months of it at the end of the program was you got assigned a place to work. It was essentially an internship. Like I didn't get paid for it. It was so 2-month practicum that I was doing, and you got to choose. I don't know if they set people up ever in the US or not, especially this was early in the school that was doing this. But you could pick cities and areas that you wanted to go to, or even just like local. And they had basically different companies that they worked with or tried to set people up. And so, like I said, I was in this small city. It's Brandon, Manitoba. It's like 2 hours outside of Winnipeg. That's where I grew up. I quickly wanted to get out of there for sure. And so I was like, yeah, let's do my work practicum in Winnipeg. At least I know it's not super far, but at least it got me out there. And my girlfriend, wife now, she was going to school there. So it made sense to go out to Winnipeg. So I started there at an agency, did my 2-month practicum, unpaid. But then they quickly hired me full time, which was great. So I ended up spending a few years with them. A lot of what the digital agency there did was they did like government work, different, actually fairly large projects that they were doing and working with clients. A lot of what I was doing was the beautiful Flash applications that I was building and doing Flash games, things like that really a lot of my focus started there, and we did a lot of that. But as quickly as Flash started dying down, more clients were not using Flash, or we weren't even recommending it. So that was really when div layouts started coming about, no more table layouts, which was somewhere around that time. And also things more JavaScript, jQuery, things that I started to just pick up more and diving in deep there. So hanging up the action script and moving over to more JavaScript. Not that I hadn't done it before, but that was just had to have more focus in it.
Those early days like that, because I mean, it's early days of JavaScript too as well. What did those days look like? You know, because now we have unlimited resources from anything from YouTube, you know, to blogs, stuff. You can learn stuff through podcasts. You know, so what did those early days look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Forums, that was a thing. So like your online pieces were forums. There weren't the great communities around. I mean, they were there, but they weren't. Yeah, we didn't have. I mean, YouTube, it started to exist, but there weren't like all the nice courses and even companies building online courses around it. That it just wasn't, it was probably there, but just not as easy to find or coming across that. So there's definitely forums for that. But also I attribute a lot of it too to some of the people that I worked with. There was a few programmers that I just spent a lot of time with, asking questions, paired programming, things like that, that really, really helped me better understand things. And then just going and spending a lot of time on my own. Books existed too, like, you know, those physical paper books. They're very thick. Those, they weren't my favorite, but that was another thing, is just pulling up that fat book and going through it and learning. I found the best way to learn was ultimately trying to build something, like whether it be a small application that I wanted to build or even a website or whatever it looked like. I found like that really helped me, you know, it's like I need to create search or something like that. How do I do this? And, you know, it was just like gave me a reason to learn as I went. And so a lot of it earlier in my career was just like building small applications and just like playing with different things and learning as I went.
Ryan, this is I got a question for you. You have a love for design, you know, so if it's you know, if it's physical, it's digital and stuff, design, you have a love for design. I would imagine there wasn't a lot of emphasis placed on design, and for as well, I'll say this: design didn't have its own definition in those times, the early days. How did you bridge the gap for your love to design with your love of programming? Because I'm pretty sure it was definitely a different level back then.
Oh yeah, totally. So I did, when I started at that agency, like the first one and the practicum, I remember I worked closely with a visual designer, or I don't know, maybe you called him a web designer at the time, I'm not even sure. So I worked closely with him. It worked with it was a fairly small agency too. So there was like 9 people in total. It wasn't very big. But I also worked with other programmers. And so it was kind of cool. I got to like do various things, especially in the practicum. It was just like not necessarily being like, oh, you're just going to program or you're going to just do design. I got to do like a little mix of things. And so I got to work with various people on that. But as I, you know, wanted to lean more into the programming side, and that's what they were hiring me for, when I would work with them, a lot of it was like the designer would build and lay out everything is similar to today. And then we would, whether it be in Flash or building out in HTML and JavaScript, that's what we would do. So I think it's very similar. The programs were a little bit different. I think like back then the Photoshop existed, but I remember the designer I worked with really liked Macromedia Fireworks, and it was Macromedia at the time. I know Adobe ended up purchasing Macromedia. So like this is how old some of this stuff is.
I think interesting too. You found another way to kind of to combine your love for design, mostly, if I'm not mistaken, like graffiti and street culture, like street art, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was strong influence into like, I still to this day love like going and checking out graffiti and like I'll take photos, things like that. I'm love that culture. My Instagram is tattoos and graffiti, and you know, like that's what I still really enjoy.
So talk about, because you ended up leaving that agency and you founded your own company, correct?
I what? Sorry.
I say you ended up leaving that agency. You founded your own company, correct?
A drawing company.
I say you founded your own company.
Oh yeah, kind of, yeah. I think it was more of a side project. Definitely kept that one going for a long time. I actually learned a ton of things on that too. But yeah, I built a street art and graffiti magazine, blog, whatever we're calling it at the time. That was really early on. Early WordPress days. Building around that. It got a lot of traction. There was a lot of traffic to it. I made, wasn't a ton of money, but made money off advertisements and sometimes even different events and things that I would participate in. getting invited to things like that were really cool. I think I even taught a couple workshops on graffiti and giving the history of things like that. So yeah, it was more of a side business, nothing that I ever took on full time, but just something that always really kept me interested in and kept going, especially when you see that people are attracted to it and there's like this traffic that people keep coming back to. You're like, oh, it kind of always has motivated me to be like, oh, well, if people are coming, I guess I should keep this going. Like there's people are finding it useful, and keeping it going.
So you've made your transition. Now you've you're coming from Toronto. You're going through. You had your first job. You have your agency. You put a side hustle stuff as well. During this time period, when do you start to really kind of like grasp hold of like I can really become a high skill engineer?
That's a good question. So yeah, after that first agency, I moved to Toronto. And there was definitely a lot more agency jobs there, and there were bigger clients too. So like I think of some of the clients that I was working with were like Walmart, Home Depot, Bell, Rogers, which are similar to like AT&T in the US, if people aren't familiar, but they're large telecom services, TELUS, CIBC Bank. There's just a lot of different large companies and applications that we were building. I worked at a couple agencies and similar, they had large clients. And so I think it was that point that I started diving a lot more into JavaScript heavily, like having to build very interactive applications, caring a lot more about performance and how these were working, and how like our clients public, like these are public facing consumer products that were being used, and how people were interacting with them. I think it just really, I think it was then that I really became a lot more deep into JavaScript. And it was during the time when there was a lot more frameworks. It wasn't, we started out doing a lot of jQuery, but then there was something like, I feel like next it came like something like Knockout. And Knockout gave you some two-way data binding. You're like, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool. And then something like Backbone comes along and you're like, oh, cool. This gives you a lot more than just what Knockout and jQuery were doing. And then, Angular came along and you got even more, and it was easier to like build up components a lot more. And then, yeah, it just kind of built off of that. I feel like is Angular and then React. And so I just got introduced to more and more frameworks and doing more JavaScript focused. So I don't know if that kind of helps answer the question, but I feel like that's where I really felt a lot stronger in the front end. Front end was becoming more of a thing too, right? Like before it was this weird mix where it wasn't really defined. I still don't think it was fully defined. And even to this day, it's hard to define what front end means, but I feel like it was becoming a more of a thing where people, cared about the HTML, the markup, what it looked like, the CSS, and the JavaScript, not just like a Java backend or caring about what that looks like. It was really having these two ownership models.
So is it fair to say that you start to kind of feel, maybe we'll call it a senior level skill set? Is it fair to say you start to do that? I don't know. Was it more so the more jobs you acquire as far as like companies and positions, or do you think it was more so like the more different frameworks, like you said, and more projects and stuff when you worked on, or was it a combination of both?
I would say it was probably a combination of both. The more projects, the more exposure that I was having to the various clients we were working with. I started to lead projects as well, just as I got more experience. I feel like that really sometimes, like, that's another debate, is like, what does senior engineering mean? And to me, it's hard to define. It's not necessarily you have the set amount of years of experience, or sorry, like years of experience, but I think it is a lot about the experiences that you've had, and really understand like how to architect a project or think about how is it going to scale. And that comes just with doing and with experience. So you can read about it, and sure, that will help, but really just having more and more of that experience. I don't know when it officially became like I was a senior engineer. Like that even then, I don't even know if the titles were strong there, but it was around that time in Toronto that I felt like, yes, I'm very good at this. This is something I'm really enjoying. I'm starting to like really be a front end engineer.
So eventually, you found your way to Evernote, which is, if I'm not mistaken, was that your first transition to the Bay as well?
Yeah, it was. It was funny. My wife and I both got tired of the cold. We were like, all right, Toronto is a fun city. I really love that city, but definitely we're needing a change. And it was like, well, where should we go? And the funny thing is, like, neither of us had really spent time in San Francisco or the Bay Area, but both decided like this makes sense to move out there. That's the heart of tech. There's a lot of great companies that we admired, and we're like, yeah, this would be a great place to go and work. And so, yeah, my first job in the Bay Area was working at Evernote. It was really cool to work at a company where I was like, this is a product that I use. Like very early on when the iOS App Store was launched, like Evernote was fairly early in that. And that was something I'd been a user of in my day-to-day work and life when I lived in Toronto. So it was really cool to then go to a company like Evernote and work there.
So what was some of the stack that you worked on over at Evernote?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first started, I felt like there wasn't a lot of front-end engineering. Like there was, but it was very heavy Java based, and it was more like the Java engineer also had to do some HTML and CSS, and they were using for JavaScript, it was the Google created as GWT, GWT, which is Java that transpiles down to JavaScript. So that was not my I don't really like that so much. So it was really then focusing more, introducing, I think we did so that was on some of the application, and there were some of the other pieces of the website that started to be more, there was some Angular, but a lot of jQuery and just vanilla JavaScript. I believe later, even after I left it, that's when the company started to adopt React, but React was coming out when I was still there, and we were starting to have those conversations of like, do we adopt React, and does this make sense? Started to do more with Node, but yeah, early on it was a very heavy Java shop, and there wasn't a lot of focus on front end. So I felt like I was one of the earlier front end engineers there, and really it was kind of cool to help shape like what does a front end engineer here do, and how do we help shape this?
So you spent, if it's around React came out when you were leaving Evernote. So what's this, 2014, 2015?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you wanted to get a little bit more into front end. Is that the reason you wanted to make a transition when you was at Evernote?
No, I would say like when I was at Evernote, like that's what my focus was. Like when I joined there, I joined as a front end engineer. I just felt like it was earlier that they didn't have a lot of that separation. So when I joined, I was doing front end like JavaScript, HTML, CSS. Like I'm sure I touched some of the Java, but not that wasn't really a big thing. Actually, one section of the one website I worked on was heavily in PHP. I'd done PHP at other companies, and even on like doing WordPress plugins and things like that. So that was very familiar with me as well. Some of the agencies in Toronto that I worked on, I had to do a little bit of Java here and there, but not there again. I was always really working in the front end, was more my specialty. But I always had exposure to that. So I was comfortable, at least if I needed to go into the back end and work on that. So no, I would say like definitely was staying front end, even when I was in Toronto. I just don't know how well defined front end was. But yeah, it was always really my focus to think about building UIs and, building out the design and what that experience looks like to the interactions and front end.
I think something interesting you just said is that it wasn't, it may not have been specifically defined, what front end was at Evernote. From what I hear, Netflix is very defined when you go into a particular role. And so talk about your transition from Evernote to Netflix. And before I say that, happy 5-year anniversary.
Thank you.
At
Yes.
Netflix as well. But yeah, talk about your transition.
Yeah, good question. So I'll start with a little bit of backstory in Evernote first. So while I was at Evernote, I was doing like I said, doing front end. I was more of a front end lead, and one day walked into work and had my manager, director, actually the VP, say, "You're now leading this team." So I just all of a sudden became a manager, which was good and bad. It's like it was something that I'd always been like, yeah, I could see myself one day managing a team. Didn't really expect to be thrown in necessarily at that moment, but I was, all right, this sounds like a cool new challenge. So it was actually at Evernote where for a good year I started to manage a team, hire, do all that, and kind of figure out being a manager. And so when I moved to Netflix, I actually moved there as a manager. So my entirety of time at Netflix, I've been an engineering manager. And so over the years, or not over years, but while I was at Evernote, I started to meet some of the Netflix engineers, whether that be at events or conferences. So I met a few of them. We actually were talking about some of the work that they'd been doing for A/B testing, but also they were moving to Node, and early days, like it wasn't React that they were moving to. It was, but they were first starting moving to Node, and that was something that we were doing at Evernote as well. And so a lot of it was just like, what have you guys learned? How are you approaching it? And there was a lot of this back and forth. And then they started to introduce React, and that was really cool. And that was something we were also talking about at Evernote. So these conversations were happening, and just with some of the engineers I had met the director of acquisition UI, Chris St. Amant.
Okay. So last time you said you were starting to meet a lot of the engineers at Netflix. And yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, I was saying that I met with a couple of the engineers, and then met the director of acquisition UI, Chris St. Amant, and he had been asking me to join Netflix. And for the first little while, honestly, I was like, yes, definitely, I can see myself at Netflix. It sounds like they're doing all the great things. I knew there was a lot of great people there, but it wasn't the right time for me. I just felt like, yeah, maybe. And also, I wasn't sure about doing the commute because the commute from San Francisco, it's to Los Gatos, for the people that aren't in the Bay Area. It's about a 45 minute drive. So that was something that him and I met. I think we grabbed drinks at a bar in San Francisco, and he'd actually just moved to San Francisco for about 6 months. So he was talking to me about that and saying like, hey, it's not that bad, and kind of walking me through what the commute was like. And they have shuttles and everything, which was great. And so he was like, would you join? And I said, sure. And so I think like in like 2 days or something, I went in and interviewed and signed an offer, and was then joining Netflix. So it happened fairly quickly. It was just, it was great to see the persistence from him, continually asking me and finally sitting down with me and saying like, hey, the commute's not that bad. I don't think that was the only holdup. It just, I was enjoying my time at Evernote. And so that was, just didn't feel like the right time, and then it was. So so I joined Netflix as a manager of part of the acquisition UI team that he was leading. It had continued to grow, and so he wanted to hire another manager. And even since then, it's grown even quite a bit since I've been there. Like you said, 5 years. Yesterday was my 5-year anniversary.
Awesome. So 5 years ago, what did Netflix look like then as a company? So what did it look like then as a product, to the consumer? And then what does it look like then as a company for employees?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, Netflix was obviously streaming. Years prior, they started out as a DVD by mail company. And that still exists. That was only done in the US, but that still exists. So streaming started up, and slowly streaming, when I joined, they definitely launched in more countries like LATAM markets. Canada existed. I know Canada existed because when I was in Toronto, I was very excited when we finally got Netflix in Toronto. So there was some countries that they, and like Europe had Netflix, but what really changed for me in my first year, maybe it was into the second year, we launched globally, and that was huge. We launched in all countries, and that was like a big change in just how we had to think about how we did, and like thinking about the different member types, especially for on my end. The acquisition UI team supports sign up. We do all of sign up, payments, onboarding, registration, and login, and we do that really cross platform. So we're building all the experiences, that first touch point for iOS, Android, website, and TV. And so that was really exciting for us too, is like, how do we make sure that we build these experiences and get them right for the newer markets? So that changed a lot. I feel like, you know, our scope of things changed. You're now working with even more people across the globe and thinking about it from a global perspective. And I still think it's something that we're continually learning too. And A/B testing comes into play a lot there too.
On the engineer side, talk a little about what type of mind. I mean, you briefly discussed about, but talk a little bit about the mindset of this product that you're building, and making sure that it's going to be mobile friendly, not only mobile friendly, but iOS and then Android, and then also on the web and then TV as well, because those sound like four different problems and four different ways to think. Talk about the mindset that you guys are being in as you're building that product.
Yeah, it's a great question, because yes, it brings unique challenges all around. So there's been an evolution for Netflix in general. Like when I first joined you, this made me think of that too, is like, you know, what's changed, and then specifically to the platform that I thought was really interesting when I joined, and really finding this out that I didn't know as a consumer, was when around the time when I joined, we were just starting to migrate the iOS application away from being a web view. Like, so the member iOS application years ago was all built with JavaScript and was just a web view container that was being served up for iOS. And I was blown away. Like, honestly, when I joined and found that out, I was like, seriously, like this is all web? Like, it was all done in JavaScript. And I was really impressed by how well it was done. I remember thinking through how hard that would be, like different swiping and gestures being done. So that was, you know, obviously it's harder to scale and performance and things. And there was a lot of reasons pushing the company to build it natively, but they did that. So then but for sign up and for iOS and Android, it was all done in a web view for a while, for years, as me being there. That was beneficial in many ways for us to ship essentially our responsive web sign up flows just through a contained web view on both iOS and Android. You essentially got three of the platforms almost all at once, which was really beneficial, and especially with the rapid A/B testing that we were doing, it was great to have that ability. But it comes with also some limitations and trade-offs, where it is harder to build features that feel native. They never quite feel native, and it takes a lot to get there. Performance issues, things like that. I felt like we were doing fairly well. We were building the experience that needed to be done, but it felt like we could get more if we moved to native, taking more advantage of native features, less complexity of dealing with a web view bridge. If anyone's ever had to deal with like the native bridge, it's kind of this black hole sometimes when you're passing back and forth from a web view to the native bridge. So we then moved for iOS and Android. We moved it to native. So yes, now my team had to now be working on iOS and Android as a native experience. So not most of the team was heavily in JavaScript and was building on the web. So we hired more native iOS and Android engineers to join the team. But that does come at, you now have more people because you have to support multiple platforms. And then TV, you mentioned, I think that one's always been really interesting as well. It comes with its own unique challenges. One thing that's really nice is you have one aspect ratio, which is very helpful. Anyone who works in web, we're like, oh my God, all the different browsers, or like sizes, screen resolution, all these different things that we deal with. Well, with TV, you at least have that one aspect ratio, but you deal with a lot of performance constraints because you're building a application that works on like a set-top box, which, a cable set-top box is not very powerful. And you're building up to something like the PlayStation 4 or some of the smart TVs. There's all these varying degrees of what you're building to on the platform, which is super interesting. And all of the Netflix application for TV is actually embedded JavaScript. So I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, well, some of the, say, Sony TVs, or they've adopted Android. So are you building that as like a native Android application? Well, no, it's actually all JavaScript in this application. And Netflix has built their own framework for the TV. This is years before I joined, but it's gotten more evolved. They are using React on the JavaScript side as well for TV, and we use React on the web too.
Talk a little bit about your day-to-day, Ryan. You're engineering manager. Actually, before that, confirm something for me. Interesting. I've heard that Netflix, it's extremely unique because you either have two positions in engineering. Everybody comes in as an engineering manager now.
No, I think the unique one is there's no levels. And so that is very unique to compared to other companies, is we hire senior software engineers. And that is like as one title across the board, which is very unique. We don't have like, L4, L5, L6, like there's not these levels that are there. It's one level. Yes, there technically is, there's engineering manager, there is directors, VPs, etc. But on the engineering track, you're a senior software engineer.
So talk about a little bit about your day-to-day. What does your usual day-to-day look like?
Typically a lot of meetings. That's the engineering manager life, is a lot of meetings. And Google Docs. I spend a lot of my time in Google Docs, whether that be like writing them or, commenting, or a lot of what we do is we write up proposals and everything in Docs. That's one aspect of it. So that is part of the day-to-day. I think about my responsibility as a manager is to care a lot about what the team does and, help set them up for success, make sure that I'm hiring the right people. That's a big portion of my role, is hiring. I think about that as really, really important, is like you're only as good as your team, and making sure that you have the right people in place to build the experiences that we're trying to achieve and build. So that's super important. But then also making sure that there's growth for the team too, is like, how do I set people up for success, making sure that they're working on the right projects, or getting exposure to things if maybe they want to go down a management track or lead projects. And so looking for opportunities for them to grow and giving feedback and helping. It's not really specifically every day is like set, like you got to do these things every day. It's like all these things are kind of balancing throughout each day.
I've heard something interesting too, that something else I believe that's unique of Netflix is, if you get hired on to be focusing React, is it true that's the only thing that you probably would ever do unless you want to transition to something new?
No.
So meaning like, if I'm a JavaScript developer, and something new comes up, and they want me to focus on back end now. Do a lot of people shift into that and be asked to learn something new?
Yeah, no, I think so. There's always opportunity to shift or try something different. There has been, people moved into from like an engineer to management, or there's even, I've seen engineers move from like front end, back end, or back end to, I think of the one case, there was a back end engineer I worked really closely with. He's now moved into data science. So there's definitely opportunities to move and transition. Most of the times it's more on the individual. Like, is that something that they want to do? Do they have the right skill set for that too? Because that is important as well. It's not like, oh, well, just because you're at Netflix, you can go do anything. It's like we do want to make sure that they have the right skill sets, and helping them get that, or learning that, and making sure that they can actually execute on the job that they're doing. But yeah, there is a lot of opportunity to change that. I also don't think like it should be specific, especially in the front end, is saying like, oh, we hire someone to work on React and they're only going to work on React. Because I mean, there's a lot of people on the team that I work on today that had to learn React on the job because React was new, and that we adopted that at Netflix. And so tomorrow it might be a completely different framework, and that's okay. So also, we've hired people that have never worked on React. Like today, I might hire someone who's never had experience working in React, but they know JavaScript. And I'm confident that the important piece of it is learning JavaScript or knowing JavaScript, that they can work on another framework.
So let's from you just say, you focus on hiring a lot. And when you get hired in Netflix, you are a senior engineer. So at Netflix, let's define that, because let's say we have three people. We have person A here they're fresh out of the boot camp. We have person B here who's fresh out of school. And we have person C here who is self-learning. And, they've been self-learning for some time now, but they're looking for their first role. What are the likelihood of those three individuals being hired on Netflix, and even more so your team?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I always look at it as like, what does senior mean is very hard to define. Like, I don't believe that it's necessarily like you have to have 10 years of experience, 5 or 2 or 3. I don't know. Like, but one thing that I would say is someone, especially in the product org that I work in typically, and I don't want to speak for all of Netflix because there's no set rules or anything on this necessarily, but oftentimes for the most part is you have experience. So someone coming right out of a boot camp or right out of school that's typically not the person we would hire. We're looking for someone that has experience. And so that maybe it is only 2 years of experience. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have a computer science degree. Like, maybe you are a self-taught. There's people I work with that have computer science degrees. Some people have like history degree, or people don't have a degree at all. There's all different backgrounds, which I really appreciate. I think the one piece of it there, to your question, is like someone coming straight out of a boot camp. That typically doesn't happen. That we're looking for someone has a little more real world experience.
Okay, and I have another question, but we'll jump into Q&A here. So the first question is from Faisal. He said, if you were to start your tech career, now what technologies would you learn and concentrate on?
Whew, that's a great question. Definitely not Flash. I wouldn't start there now. But for me, if it's on the front end, and I've been asked this question specifically for front end a lot, is like where to start and put your focus on. I always say JavaScript. I think like, yes, there's a lot of great frameworks, and I think learning a framework is great. But if you can understand the fundamentals of JavaScript, that's the important piece. Even talking back to my days in Toronto, like I was touching all these different frameworks, working at an agency, working on different products for different consumers, which exposed me to a lot of these frameworks, but they came and went. And at the end of the day, it was JavaScript that I knew, and I was able to, I still had to learn like the different patterns that were in each of the frameworks, but I felt confident that I could do that just by having the fundamentals of JavaScript there. then, I mean, but I don't know, then maybe it's like mobile didn't exist during my starting my career. I think that's something that I love that I'm exposed to it at Netflix and have my team working on that. That's maybe even something that I would have maybe changed career altogether and been focused on learning that as well.
Awesome. Next question is from Mr. or Mrs. Young. So how was the transition from engineer to manager? Do you miss the technical hands-on area at times?
I love that question because it's not easy. To me, oftentimes like people will say, oh, you got promoted to manager. And I don't believe that. You don't get promoted to it. It's a completely different role. That's what it is. And it's almost like, it's interesting. I felt like I was a strong engineer. And then you get moved into management and you're like starting out from the bottom. You're starting all over this new role. So that was difficult, just like learning like what is this role? Like what should I be doing? How am I most effective? And some of that was really difficult too, because you don't have something as tangible as shipping a feature or closing out a bug. Those aren't as tangible wins that you have as an engineer. And also it's harder for me, it was like, I did this as a career to be an engineer. Like I love creating things. And so that you're still doing that, but you're helping your team create things. You're unblocking them and allowing that. So it's just a different type of work. So that was difficult. Just that transition. It came with new challenges. So like I loved all the people challenges and learning how to navigate that in my new role. And so it was the challenging aspects that really drove me. And I started to really enjoy that. Learning to hire and build a team was super exciting. And that's still something today I really enjoy doing. But yeah, I would say the itch to develop is always still there. It's gotten better over the years. For the first like year or two, it was always this constant struggle of like, should I go back to being an engineer? Should I go back? Like, and that's, I've gotten over that, over the years. I feel like, no, I really love the role that I'm in. But I still do things on the side, probably less and less over the years, but it's something that I still enjoy building things. So there are times when I'm building something at home or side projects and things like that too.
Awesome. Okay, next question is from Steven. Steven says Netflix is one of the FANG companies, stocks that benefits from network effects, unlike conventional businesses. So what direction would you like to see Netflix go in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, thinking about even just like our goals now, or like I like the direction that the company's headed. It's, building entertainment for people, and building a great platform for it. I love the direction that the company's headed in the sense that, years ago it was like getting licensed content to the platform, and that still happens, but now it's also creating content, and really like building up that side of the business has been really exciting. And then even as we've been doing that, I'm really excited to see us improve that experience on the creative side, is building like tools, taking technology and making things easier for creators. And we've been investing more in that. And I'm super excited. We've seen some really interesting products being created on the studio side, like things like enabling us the ability to make interactive content like Bandersnatch. That was amazing. Like I'm so impressed with the work that was done. And so I want to see more of those types of things, like exciting new ways to interact and watch content, expose people to even international content. Like I love that. Like there's things that I feel like may just not have had the exposure without something like a worldwide company like Netflix that is, sharing this content. I think that to me is really exciting. And then on like, even on my end, it's like, how do we think about some of our newer markets and get them excited to join Netflix? Because there's people, not everyone has Netflix. And so it's always thinking about how do you get more people wanting and seeing value in signing up for Netflix.
Awesome. Okay, next question is from Rixio. Says, does Netflix offer any entry-level internships or apprenticeships at Netflix? If so, where can he find them?
I believe some teams have started to do a little bit of that, but it's not something typically that we've done. And so I don't really have a good answer on that, but internships, like kind of similar to the senior software engineer, is typically we haven't done that. I know that some teams have maybe started to try and do that, but it's not something that I can really answer.
Okay. Next question is from Mayana. It says, can you speak to how the diversity within your field has changed over the time and what difference it makes, if any? How diverse is your team?
Ooh, that's such a great question. I think diversity has always been important and always been there as being important. I mean, you need people from all walks of life, whether it be race or gender, but like even just growing up in certain areas of a country or different countries, or having different backgrounds of not necessarily all being, like I said back saying that earlier, we don't hire just people who have a computer science degree and like you have to have that. I think having all these different backgrounds really helps build a more diverse product. And I think that's so important. Is I'm not building Netflix for myself. That may look completely different and may not be the greatest experience for a global audience. And so I think it's really, really important to build diverse teams to help foster just different ideas, because you're building for a lot of people that you can't go and ask every individual, hey, would you like this feature? Would this work for you? So a lot of it is really just having a great team that just raises, have we thought about this? So, in India, this works a little bit different. And that's something that I wouldn't know, but someone on my team has just surfaced. And I think those types of things are just invaluable. Like they're so important.
Awesome. Next question is from Dara. Apologies for mispronouncing that. Says, do you have any tips on what sort of projects I should be putting in my portfolio or building for a front-end developer? I've done a few smaller projects online, but I want to make sure that those projects are robust enough to be taken seriously by companies such as Netflix.
That's a good question. I don't think it's necessarily specific that there's like one certain type of project or application, side project, whatever it is, that you have to, that makes you stand out or create. I think it's creating something that you're passionate about. That's, to me, is really important. Is like, anytime, going back to, we talked about like that graffiti and street art magazine blog that I built. Like I was super passionate about that side and I learned a ton creating it. But if I went to go create something for, I don't know, that's some random thing like food or something, which I actually do like food. But anyways, like if it was something that I'm not really that excited about, I don't think that the end product would have been as good. So I always think about it as like, just create something, demonstrating, especially if you haven't worked at a company, it's like demonstrating like I've built this and here's how I thought about it. I think that you'll learn a ton, but you can also have something to demonstrate to companies and show them that. So I don't think there's one specific thing, unfortunately. I don't think there's, the simple thing to just go create. Hopefully that was a helpful answer.
All right, cool. We're going to take one more question from Brittany. She says, I think I'll find all greater value in decentralized forms of entertainment. While these products can be isolating, do you have any opinion on how these FANG products can better engage existing customers, but also attract and include older generations from socioeconomically challenged communities that are indirectly excluded from these products?
Whew, that's a big question. I think it's one that, like we talk about FANG companies, like I think all companies are trying to do that. And I don't think there's a perfect answer. Is how do we expose our products to everyone? And so thinking about whether it be building a product a little bit differently to expose, to make it available to others, but like maybe it's a price thing. And so, we've seen even something with like Apple, they're now making different variations of their products to expose more people to it. So maybe you can hit a bit lower of a price point and not that top end price point that not everyone can afford. And so I think the same things for Netflix is like, are there ways that you can build different pricing models and tiering to expose people to it, or some countries that are more mobile friendly, is there specifically that you're building a better mobile product? I think to me, it's something that all companies are looking to do. And I don't think there's a one answer to that. But it is a challenge. It absolutely is a challenge. And it's super interesting and exciting in my mind, because I don't think there is a simple solution.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm gonna see. I'm actually gonna ask the last question. Then we're gonna wrap it up here. A buddy of mine actually gave me this question. Along your journey, Ryan, from the early days and get started in web development to get into Netflix, what are some things that you had to unlearn to get to where you are now?
Oh, that was a tough question. I don't have a good answer for you.
So anything, like maybe change of habits, maybe had to really, you thought you knew how to learn, but you had to learn that way and learn a new way.
Yeah, I think like maybe even just like from being an engineer to manager, I think a lot of things that even that has changed significantly in things that I think about, like communication becomes like even more important. I think about this even as if you think about the levels of leadership in companies, like from a CEO or manager, like those are huge gaps there. But I think the more and more, the higher you go up into leadership, communication is super important. I don't think it's an easy one to just learn. It comes with a lot of practice. And so that could be verbal communication or written communication. I think that's something that I've had to up level on. And I still think there's a long way for me to go on that. But the reason it comes so important is because you're trying to set a direction for your team or for a company. And if it's not clear or it's very verbose, that's really difficult for people to execute on. So I think that's something that maybe I didn't have to unlearn. It's like something that I had to maybe ramp up a lot more on, and still wish I was 10x better on.
Okay, cool. I lied. One more question, and we're gonna go. For the people who are watching, you got people that may be at a boot camp. Some people already have their engineering jobs, but their end goal may be to get to Netflix. And so we'll take it from the person who already has their first job, or even the person looking for the first job. What are the next steps that someone can take to get there, to start their journey on getting to Netflix?
Yeah, to me, like there's a lot of it is, I mean, you can apply. That's a good start, is like just hit up there's job websites, whether it be a Netflix or any company, apply. I think that's always a great start. But another thing is networking. I don't think we emphasize this enough. It's not specifically to Netflix, but it's really just getting out there and like meeting people. And it's not easy. A lot of people do not, a lot of us are introverts and not necessarily wanting to meet people. But I think being able to go and meet with people, and whether it be at events or conferences, have discussions, going online. I mean, especially with where we're at right now, is a lot of people, there's like conferences like this where it's very accessible to everyone to be able to network or jump on Zoom calls, things like that, which I think are really, really beneficial. You learn from each other, but then you also never know, like that's now a potential contact that you're like, they might reach out to you for roles, or you might just ask them for advice, or, hey, do you have any open opportunities? I think networking is a really important factor that we don't necessarily always talk about.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Ryan, man, we appreciate your time. Definitely thank you for being here. Definitely enjoyed the story, getting to Netflix. Guys, I'm gonna put up the QR code in a second here for Ryan, so you guys can follow up with him. You can follow him on social media, connect with him on LinkedIn, and then we'll be looking to start out in the section.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully it was useful to everyone too. So I don't know if I listed it too, but people can also, I don't know if I saw some comment on there that someone listens to Front End Happy Hour, which is a podcast that I do with others from Netflix and other companies. So if you want to hear more, we sit around and have drinks and talk about front end. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it, Ryan.
Cool. Well, thank you all. Like I said, hopefully it was useful. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks, Marlon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.